Fairy Tail should be in the same conversation as Naruto and Bleach. The bones were there, the characters were there, the soundtrack was there, the emotional foundations were there. Something went wrong, and I think we all know exactly when it started. We just don't want to say it out loud. So let's say it out loud. What's up everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing something a little different. We're talking about Fairy Tail, but not in the way we usually talk about it. Not the hype moments or the OST, not Erza changing armor mid-air while the 30-piece orchestra loses its mind. We're talking about why a show, with all of that, still didn't land in the Cultural Hall of Fame, next to the series it should have been running with. This isn't a takedown. Fairy Tail genuinely does things that almost no other shonen pulls off. But there's a specific reason it gets talked about with hesitation instead of respect. And that reason is worth examining honestly. Let's establish the foundation first, because this is important. Fairy Tail at its best is exceptional at a very specific thing, making you feel something before you've had time to put your guard up. The emotional moments land because the relationships underneath them were built carefully. The Tower of Heaven arc doesn't hit as hard as it does because Erza is powerful. It hits because you spent 30 episodes learning exactly what she was protecting and why. When that history arrives, it doesn't feel like backstory. It feels like the show collecting on an investment it made in you specifically. Fairy Tail speeches get mocked occasionally for being Nakama-flavored motivational posters, but the best ones work because they're delivered by characters whose histories justify every word. The OST is doing active structural work in every scene it appears in, the main theme, Erza's theme, the battle tracks that kick in at exactly the right frame. A significant portion of why the highs feel as high as they do is because of what's playing underneath them. The characters have weight: Erza, Gray, Lucy, Nuts. These are people the show built over years rather than types it deployed when convenient. The relationships between them feel genuine. The guild as a concept, the idea that found family is worth fighting for with everything you have, is conveyed not through speeches alone, but through accumulated evidence. That's difficult to do, and Fairy Tail did it. Here's where we come to the topic of sacrifice and death. Someone you love is going to step forward, accept an outcome they can't survive, and the remaining characters carry that weight forward. It's one of the oldest structures in shonen, and it works because it's true. Sometimes people don't come back, and that permanence is what gives the sacrifice meaning. Except that's the thing. The meaning is lost when they don't actually die, and it's like almost impossible for characters in Fairy Tail to die. We have Aquarius having her key destroyed, an emotional farewell that meant little when she wasn't actually dead. We have Gajeel literally being taken to the underworld, another supposedly emotional moment where we all thought he was dying, but nope, just another fake out. Even Juvia stabs herself, but it doesn't matter because no one dies in this series, and the worst case is Makarov. Like, look at this guy. He's basically turned to stone, and then ends up being completely fine after. The pattern establishes itself quickly enough that by the third or fourth reversal, the audience has recalibrated entirely. The emotional circuitry that should fire when someone sacrifices themselves stops connecting. Not because the scenes are written poorly, some of them are written beautifully, but because the show has trained you to know that the cost will be refunded. This is the single most damaging thing Fairy Tail did to itself. Not because death is the only valid storytelling tool, but because the show kept deploying sacrifice as its highest stakes emotional moment, while systematically removing the consequence that makes the sacrifice meaningful. You can't have both. You have to choose what kind of story you're telling. Naruto chose, Bleach chose, Fairy Tail kept trying to have it both ways, and the structural damage compounded every arc. The original series has a consistent visual identity. It's not the best animation in the genre, but it has character and commitment. The continuation is where things start to slip. The final series covering the Alvarez Empire arc, the biggest arc in the entire manga, the one that was supposed to be the culmination of everything, arrives looking noticeably worse than what came before it. Fairy Tail's fight sequences were never purely technical exercises. They were emotional spectacles designed to look and sound like the most important thing happening in the world at that moment. When the animation budget visibly shrinks during those moments, the spectacle deflates. The gap between what the music is promising and what the screen is delivering becomes impossible to ignore. The 10 Wizard Saints. For most of the series, they're the ceiling. The 10 strongest mages on the continent, figures of legitimate authority and terrifying power. The show builds this hierarchy carefully and then uses it to establish stakes. If a threat is dangerous enough to challenge a Wizard Saint, the audience knows the stakes are real. Then the Spriggan 12 arrive, and Fairy Tail makes a promise. The weakest of the Spriggan 12 is stronger than the strongest of the 10 Wizard Saints. This statement is delivered with complete seriousness. It's the show establishing a new power ceiling and telling you exactly how high it is. Then, the Spriggan 12 start losing. Not all of them. Some of them are every bit as threatening as advertised, but several members of a group, explicitly introduced as continental threats above the Wizard Saint tier, end up being handled with relative ease by characters who shouldn't be anywhere near that level. The promise the show made collapses under the weight of its own roster, and once you notice the math doesn't hold, you can't stop noticing it. It's a pacing and planning issue more than an execution issue. The Alvarez arc was always going to feature that guild against 12 powerful opponents, which means 12 fights, which means 12 of those fights had to end somehow with a finite runtime. Some of them got shortcuts, and they were visible, and a power system that stops making internal sense and stops generating genuine stakes, no matter how good the music underneath it sounds. We first see Acnologia in the Tenmojima arc, and it's one of the best villain introductions in the genre. He appears without warning, destroys an entire island as a casual demonstration of his capabilities, and leaves. No speech, no explanation, just obliteration. The guild who survived Grimoire Heart a moment ago is completely helpless. It's a perfect scene, precisely because it doesn't try to explain itself. Power that scale doesn't need justification, it just needs to exist. The show spent years building on this. Acnologia is the immovable ceiling above every threat, the Black Dragon, something that cannot be fought, only survive. His reputation grows across every arc he isn't in, which is most of them, and then the finale arrives. Acnologia, the creature that completely erased Tenmojima, is defeated by the Dragon Slayers combining their power into Nuts, who punches him with the accumulated strength of every Dragon Slayer on the continent and the support of the entire guild. The structure is fine. Thematically it makes sense for the Dragon Slayers to be the answer to Acnologia. The execution, compressed into the final arc's already crowded timeline, surrounded by every other conflict the Alvarez arc was trying to resolve simultaneously, doesn't give it room to breathe. The monster was untouchable for years, gets touched, and then just doesn't exist anymore. And the sequence moves on before you fully process that what just happened was supposed to be the impossible thing. You don't really feel the weight of it. You register it happened, and then the next scene is already starting. For a threat that built across the years of mythology, it's genuinely a disappointing landing. None of these are small problems. Together, they form a consistent picture of a show that had everything it needed to be genuinely great and made specific, traceable choices that prevented it. Once the audience stops believing consequences are real, you've lost the tool your show depends on most. Once the eternal logic stops holding, every claimed stake becomes a negotiation rather than a given. Acnologia is a symbolic failure of the final arc to deliver what the preceding ones promised. When your most hyped up threat doesn't get the finale his build-up deserves, the series closes on a note that's lower than it should be, and the animation decline is the physical evidence that the show's biggest moments arrived without the resources they needed to be the biggest moments. Fairy Tail isn't a bad anime, that's the frustrating part. It's a show with a genuinely extraordinary emotional ceiling, one of the best soundtracks the genre has produced, a cast of characters built with real care, and a central thesis about the value of human connection that it commits to completely. It's also a show that kept pulling its punches at the exact moments it needed to commit. It kept making promises about power and stakes that it quietly renegotiated when it became convenient. It reached its biggest arc with visible seams in the budget and invisible seams in the planning. The conversation Fairy Tail should be in, the one with Naruto, Bleach, the shows that shaped the genre for a generation, is the one it almost earned. The gap between almost and actually is small enough that it hurts. That's the downfall of Fairy Tail. Not failure, just potential that peaked early and never quite recovered its footing on the way down.